Teithio dros ei llwybrau a thaim o'i hyd. Tir oedd ein dewinoedd ar gan yn un o'r gwynt yr
Hello, I'm Helen Pye and I'm the Head of Engagement for Snowdonia National Park Authority, and I'll be your host for this week's podcast. In this episode, I'll be exploring a topic that's hugely important to us here at the National Park, which is sustainable tourism. I'll be exploring how we can build a more sustainable model of tourism in Snowdonia and what we can learn from 2020, the year like no other. I'll be talking to three fantastic guests, three people with significant experience in tourism. We'll dig deep into their thoughts, opinions and ideas for the future. And we'll reflect back on the last year and the huge impacts that COVID has had on the sector. My first guest will be Dana Williams, who's the Sustainable Tourism Officer for the National Park. I'll then speak to Martin Higgitt from Martin Higgitt Associates, who's the author of the Parking and Transport Review for Snowdon and Ogwen. And finally, I'll be chatting to Michael Bewick, who's the Managing Director of J.W. Graves Limited, which is the historic company that owns Llechwedd. So my first guest for this episode is Dana Williams. Dana is our new Sustainable Tourism Officer for the National Park. Dana started in this brand new role just over a year ago now, and it couldn't have been more timely. 6 months into her new role and we were into COVID lockdown, and as everything reopened in the summer, we then saw the busiest few months we've ever experienced in the National Park. And during peak season, the issues of tourism and its sustainability, its impact on the environment and the communities of the area really came to the fore. We saw huge issues with fly camping, litter, parking problems, to name but a few, all stemming from volume and capacity issues. So, Dana, hello, and how are things with you? How are you finding this latest lockdown?
Hello. Yeah, great. I mean, I've spent a lot of time walking recently, which has been nice. I've had time to really get outside, obviously in my local area. But no, it's been really nice. And the signs of spring are coming out now as well, which is great. So working from home, I can see some of the new flowers starting to bloom from outside the window, so it's quite nice. It's not all bad.
Oh, that's lovely. So you live just on the northern coast of the National Park, don't you?
I do, yeah. So I live in Mewn at the moment. So I grew up in Bangor, but I moved to Mewn about 3 years ago. So yeah, it's a lovely area with a cynaliadwy at the back and then the coast right at the front. So it's a lovely place to live.
We're pretty spoiled, aren't we? Pretty spoiled. Yeah. It's part of Wales. So obviously last year was a pretty crazy year for the National Park. How did you find it? You know, you were just kind of 6 months into your new role and everything hit with COVID.
Yes, it was quite an exciting and challenging time, really. So as you say, I was still new to the role. So in terms of figuring out how to go about my role, as well as dealing with the sort of chaos related to coronavirus, it was quite a challenging time. But it was also a great time in terms of learning some of the valuable parts of my job as well, and some of the things that will come in terms of the future as well. It was really exciting and definitely a good learning curve. So I think there was a lot of things going on really last year. We had a lot of visitors perhaps who'd waited for lockdown restrictions to ease, and then coupled with people who'd perhaps usually visit other destinations, more indoor attractions and such, who perhaps decided it was safer to visit outdoor environments for a change. And I think a lot of people deciding to connect with nature and the outdoors to really focus on their health and well-being in terms of the benefits towards coronavirus as well. So I think we definitely saw a lot larger volume of people than we normally would. And I think this sort of exacerbated a lot of the challenges we already had in the park, such as littering, overcrowding and parking issues. I think it really just exacerbated those challenges that we already had.
And do you think, thinking forward to this coming season, obviously there's a lot of work going on in the national park at the minute to prepare for that. Do you think that we will see similar challenges this year? Do you think it's going to be the same types of audiences that are going to be attracted and the same similar volumes, but perhaps over an extended period?
Definitely, yeah. I think people are still really keen to get out into the outdoors as well. And I think it's really difficult with the situation with coronavirus and lockdowns to plan ahead as well. So a lot of people tend to leave it, I think, last minute before planning holidays. So it's really difficult to predict the trends that we're going to see. But I would imagine that, we're definitely going to see similar volumes and issues in the park this year. So we're really working hard to make sure that we don't have these issues, that we can sort of reduce the problems and the potential of these happening as much as we can. Particularly one of the challenges we saw as well was fly camping this year, which is a relatively newer problem. It wasn't unseen, but it was something that really took precedence this year. And fly camping, when we say that, we mean sort of antisocial camping, so where people are camping either in tents or camper vans, vehicles in undesignated areas, and they're not really following the countryside code, leaving behind litter and barbecues and fires and things like that, and that can cause damage to wildlife and to the environment. So that was a big challenge last year, and I definitely think that's something that people will be looking to do again this year. So it's trying to encourage people to plan ahead and book designated campsites if that's the activities that they want to do. Because obviously we don't want to prevent people coming to the park. We want people to come and enjoy the outdoors, but be safe whilst doing it, and to keep our communities and environment safe as well.
So, for the sake of, obviously, I'm kind of like quite in touch with all of the work that's going on behind the scenes at the minute, but for the sake of our listeners, tell us a bit more about the preparations that are going on in relation to fly camping, for example.
So we're doing a lot at the moment in terms of fly camping. So we've having some interesting work. We're working with Bangor University at the moment to look into behavioural insights. So it's really interesting. Obviously, we see these, usually we see the issues related to fly camping, but we're really trying to dig deep into why people carry out these behaviours in the first place. So we're trying to get some behavioural insights into that, which will then develop into how we can really do some targeted messaging to reach these people and try and change those behaviours. And there's a lot of sort of multi-agency working with partners and other local authorities on this work. I think really important to have this multi-agency approach, that we all have really strong messaging. And there's lots of other stuff going on to help with this messaging, sort of creating new content for internet and social media, carrying out some surveys to find out issues related to capacity and things like that, and just really focusing on those core messages ready for the season, so that people are a lot more prepared for when they plan to visit Snowdonia this year.
Fantastic. There's a huge amount going on, isn't there? And if any of our listeners want to help out to spread the messages, we've obviously got our ambassador scheme, and people can take part in that and help us with that messaging. And that really, certainly for me, that's what I saw last year, is one of the biggest things that can make a difference is trying to get that information out there for people whilst they're preparing for their kind of trip or journey. That they know what to expect, and encouraging people to stay in designated sites. And it's a fine balance, isn't it? People have always traditionally wild camped in the national park and followed the kind of wild camping code that we've got. But this is very much a kind of different kind of camping, isn't it?
Definitely. We've really seen a different trend. Like you say, it's usually the sort of more professional mountaineers that tend to do wild camping, but this year we've seen a lot of different people who, I suppose, normally carry out other holidays or activities, and then they've been they've decided to do camping instead. So we're seeing, larger groups and things like that. Who as you know, we want people to camp and enjoy the outdoors, but to do it in designated areas where allowed to, and then they can enjoy themselves then.
Great, thanks, Dana. We're almost running out of time. We could talk about this for hours, I'm sure. But I've got one last question or kind of topic that I really wanted to explore with you, because I think it's such a exciting piece of work that you're looking at the minute. So tell me a bit about the work that you're doing in terms of measuring the benefits and impacts of tourism with the STEAM project.
So this is some really exciting work that we're doing. It's, I think, one of the first national parks to do it within the UK really as well. So unfortunately, at the moment, there's massive emphasis on the volume. That's how it's always been, is the volume of tourists, so the visitor numbers, and what economic value they bring to parks. So we're really trying to change that perception of tourism to the value of tourism instead. So what we're looking at is creating sustainable tourism indicators. So these can be things like carbon footprint, litter levels, visitor experience, accessibility of opportunities to learn about the Welsh language and the culture, all those sorts of things and many more. So we will set those into indicators which are then measurable. So you can measure these indicators, so they create actual data for us. And then hopefully then we can use these as a benchmarking system, so that then we can compare with other destinations alike and see how we're faring, and then that will help us to come up with ideas, or we can sort of engage them where we stand in terms of sustainability. Could we do more in terms of carbon offsetting projects, or do we need to work on litter? It just really helps us to measure the value of tourism in a more holistic way than what we do now. So if this sort of pilot scheme in a way is successful, then other national parks can jump on board, and it'll be a great sort of game changer, really.
I totally agree with you, Dana, and I think it's going to be so interesting to see how this develops. Really shifting the way that we measure the value of tourism from, more equals better to what is the value that it brings, not just kind of in terms of economy, but environmentally and socially for communities as well. So benefits versus impacts, so that it's a true measure of that element. And then you can change the way that you do things. Then, if you're measuring it properly, you can kind of adjust and tweak, like you said. I'm so interested to see how that develops. I'm sure that at some point in the next kind of 6 months, when things have progressed further with that, it'd be great to have you back on to talk about what you're doing and the results and the kind of baseline figures that have been developed. Dana, it's been so lovely to chat to you. You've got a huge amount to do in preparing for the season. So I'm sure I'll just let you crack on with that. Thank you so much for your time. And look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you. Speak to you soon.
So my second guest is Martin Higgitt. Martin Higgitt runs a transport consultancy called Martin Higgitt Associates. Martin and his team developed the Parking and Transport Review, the details and recommendations of which are now in the process of being worked on and refined with the communities most closely connected to Snowdon and Ogwen. Many of you will be aware of the huge challenges we face with the volumes of visitors to Snowdon and Ogwen areas and the knock-on impact this has had on parking and transport problems. The review proposes some incredibly ambitious plans that we hope will transform the north of the national park into an area that is world-renowned for being a truly sustainable destination. So welcome, Martin. Let's get straight into it. So tell us a bit about the work you did with the Parking and Transport Review. How did you go about it?
Well, we were asked really to look at the specific problems around Yr Wyddfa and the Ogwen Valley with all of the parking pressures and the problems with the landscape and congestion, etc. So we started off by compiling data on the number of formal and informal parking areas including the 4 gateway villages on the approach to that inner area. And we looked around for evidence on the demand for parking from the councils, the national park, and also even things like Google Maps to have a look at parking situations at different times of year. We looked at the bus network and usage statistics, and we consulted with a wide range of stakeholders. So we talked to the Yr Wyddfa management group, the national park, the councils, community representatives, local tourism associations, farmers, some of the visitor attractions, people working on the ground like rangers, traffic police, tour guides, etc., to really investigate their views of what the problems were and potential solutions. And it was immediately apparent to us that the situation is really chronic during holiday times, and that slight tweaks of trying to put an extra bus service on here or a little bit more parking there really aren't going to change the fundamental dynamic of how people interact with the place, and therefore a much more sort of radical approach was needed.
It's the report is an incredibly comprehensive review, and all of that kind of data and information that you pulled together, I think is going to be very exciting in kind of properly delivering a real solution to the area. Were there any surprises, do you think, in terms of the insights you got from all the data and research that you did?
I think the scale and the extremity of the problem surprised us. We've done quite a bit of work around visitor access and travel in many tourism destinations, but it was really the scale of it in this area that really took us by surprise. We started seeing some of the videos that people had posted along the A5 by Yr Ogwen, showing 300 plus cars parked outside of the already full car parks and families walking down what is a trunk road with national speed limit to reach their destination. And that was quite shocking. And of course, we all know about the problems around Pwnc Pass, particularly before lockdown. So it was really the scale that surprised us. And I think something else that was interesting, as someone who's been to Snowdonia a few times, but didn't know the area brilliantly well beforehand, was that Yr Wyddfa is so iconic that in a way it sort of kind of hides some of the other locations and attractions in the area. And it's only when we started to do a lot of research about what other places there were to visit for people, things to do, that we realised just how many wonderful walks, great visitor attractions there were, and that therefore there's a way in which perhaps we can take some of the pressure off the honeypot sites by making people more aware of other things to do as well in the area. The last thing I thought of that was a bit surprising was really when we talked to all of these stakeholders, just the level of consensus amongst them all, everybody telling us that radical change is needed in the way visitor access is managed, and the common phrase, doing nothing is not an option. So all of the partners really have an appetite for doing something around sustainable tourism and improving the way visitors access the area.
Yeah, I think the work that's been done over the last 5 years in pulling together the Snowdon partnership has kind of really helped with that solidity of a feeling that something needs to be done. But it's like you say, it's much wider than that, isn't there? There's such an acknowledgement of the fact that this has been going on for a while and we really need something to change. Another question I've got is, when you were carrying out the work, was there any particular challenges you found in kind of writing the report and putting, apart from kind of pulling all that immense amount of data together, or was that the biggest thing?
Well, undoubtedly the biggest challenge, having been commissioned to do this report at the beginning of 2020, was the COVID pandemic. We'd done some great stakeholder research and some field visits, and we were just about to start engaging local communities and doing community events and surveys when the lockdown hit. So, and then we tried to pivot to do some online surveys with visitors and with the residents. And it was just the weekend before lockdown when everybody in, I think, the whole country decided that a visit to Yr Wyddfa would be nice. And so, of course, that caused huge problems, and we really felt we couldn't do surveys at that time. So that was one of the problems. I think despite the fact that we had fantastic data on visitor patterns, actually knowing much about residents' travel patterns and their needs is something that still needs to be worked on as we move forward, because we really want to make sure that our proposals help residents with their day-to-day travel as well. So that was a little bit of a data gap. And I think the other challenge for us was we can see the end point. We've got this aspirational vision, but it's how we reach that and all of the number of tasks that we need to do now to get to that point.
It's a huge amount of work, isn't it? And I think I would love for people to see what's going on behind the scenes, that, the huge amount of work that's going on at the minute, with ourselves, with you, with Transport for Wales. The work that's going on there is immense, and the work with the two councils as well. I think people are really pulling together, and there is momentum there. But it's big, isn't it? It's a big project. I'd ask you another question. If you were to kind of summarise for a visitor, like how it's going to change for them. So you've got somebody visiting from London, and you're going to explain to them how this new system works that's been proposed. Obviously, there's it's still to be kind of amended and adjusted based on the community input. But how would you explain it to them?
Well, I think first of all, just to give that a bit of a prefix, I wanted to say, the four key strands we saw were visitors, communities, tourism businesses and the landscape, and they're all suffering with the way tourism happens at the moment. So communities suffer from traffic congestion, parking problems of all these visitors arriving by car. Tourist businesses aren't getting as much benefit as they should out of the visitors, and of course the landscape is suffering from all that pressure. And at the same time, the poor old visitor isn't getting necessarily the greatest experience, because they're arriving at Pen y Pass or wherever to discover it's full, and then they give up and decide to stick the car on the verge, and they run up the mountain and run back again and probably discover they've got a parking ticket. So we thought, well, how can we bring all of these different interests together? So we wanted to find a way of managing the visitors that benefits the landscape and the communities and the tourism businesses. So our approach is to manage parking in the inner area, that area of special landscape beyond the 4 gateway villages, and encourage visitors to park at the gateway villages or on the approaches to them, and transfer onto high frequency shuttle services. So for a visitor coming to the area, if they're coming either as a day or a stay visitor in their car, we would be hoping that they would be parking at one of those gateway villages, transferring onto free shuttle bus service, free because they've paid with their parking tariff for a pass for it. And also that visitor pass would give them access to other discounts and services, cheaper bike hire, things like that, so that they can start to see a broader number of activities to do around the area. It will be really important that this is accompanied by excellent website and online information, so it's marketed to people before they arrive, so they know that what they can expect when they get here. And also, of course, it's really important that we market the area and make it possible for people without a car to visit. There's a growing number of younger people who aren't tending to own cars, and it's really important that they are able to access the national park in the future. I think some of the other services that we might provide, we want to provide sort of area-wide bike hire and e-bike hire, and find mechanisms whereby we can do loans to residents and so forth. And we really want, visitor attractions and other entrepreneurs within the communities to come forward with other value-added services that they can offer the visitors, be that sort of passenger pickup, drop-off, baggage transfer, things like that, so that everybody gets a better experience and the communities and the tourism businesses get more out of those visitors coming to the area.
Yeah, and I think the community master planning sessions that you guys are working on at the minute, and that are going to be happening over the next few weeks, and are going to be hugely important in just refining that and really getting not just the buy-in of local communities, but getting them to kind of help us adjust the plan so they really do meet the needs of the people that live in the area. I'd just squeeze in one. We could talk about this for hours. I know it's such a fascinating topic, but we're nearly out of time. So if we squeeze in one last question, I think one of the reasons that stood out when you and your company bid for this really important piece of work for us and the parking and transport review was it did come out really strongly, the passion that your team had for sustainability. Can I ask a bit more about that? Where's your interest and background? Have you always been interested in this sort of thing?
Well, I personally have been a transport planner for about 23 years, and I've always dealt with sustainable transport, particularly promoting walking, cycling and public transport, and quite a lot around travel behaviour. But I think one of my colleagues was a former transport officer at National Park, where they received very similar problems and issues. So we've been thinking a lot over a long period of time about how to manage visitors better. And we also had on our team someone who runs something called the Alpine Pearls Network, where they have developed over the last 15 years plus a sort of sustainable travel and tourism offer. So there's one of their particular resorts you go to. You hand your car keys in at the visitor centre, pay €10, and you've got access to car club cars, free shuttle bus services, e-bikes, any sort, cable cars, and all sorts of things like that. So they were able to also show that actually, if you do really pursue this, you can actually deliver a comprehensive and quite exciting scheme. And the interesting thing about that resort was that they've grown their tourism numbers coming into that resort since they started to develop this and really benefited the local economy.
Martin, I think we've got some really, really exciting times ahead of us. I'm so pleased of, the momentum behind this and what's going on. And it's been such a pleasure to speak to you today. Good luck with the community master planning work that's going to be happening soon. And I'm sure there'll be some real opportunities to catch up again on a podcast and see how things are progressing. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Hello, so my final guest in this episode is someone I've known for a number of years now and for whom I have a huge amount of respect and admiration. Michael Bewick is the Managing Director of JW Graves Limited, which is the historic company that owns Llechwedd. Also, he's chair of North Wales Regional Tourism Forum, which brings together local authorities, including the park, private sector and Welsh Government. And he also sits as part of this on the Welsh Government COVID Tourism Task Force. So Michael was central to bringing together representatives from the public and private sector in tourism, both during but also pre and post the COVID period. He has the admirable qualities of helping people find common ground, solutions and agreements in the most fractious of circumstances. So Michael, how are you?
Well, first of all, thanks ever so much for the introduction, which makes me sound far more dynamic than I really am. And also thanks to you, Helen, for all your support and the fun we've had. And that's the important thing, isn't it? I mean, we have to try and keep positive through this difficult time. But but I also do want to say, it's been pretty grueling, hasn't it? And since Christmas, I think, has felt really hard. I've never had a year where it felt more difficult to get going again after the new year than this one. Really tough. But, I look out of the window and I can see the Port Merion estuary out of the window here. And so you also reflect, don't you, about how actually it's been a really tough year, but crikey, here in North Wales, we are really lucky. We're the ones who can walk out of our houses and see beautiful things and walk in beautiful places from our front doors. That's pretty special, isn't it?
It is. And it, like you say, it was such a challenging time last year and now as well, kind of looking forward for the tourism industry. Tell me a bit more about what last year was like for you. It was a year like no other, really, wasn't it?
It completely was. And I think some some of the old hands in the tourism industry referred back to the foot and mouth crisis, but this is again of a magnitude greater and greater than that. And I think from the work I've done with the task force and with the forum and with others, it's clear last year had a completely devastating impact on tourism. I mean, compared to any other industry, pretty much it was devastating across the range. And what I really worried about and still worry about is the impact on the very small businesses, partly because there's been the support has been less clear for them, but also because they in aggregate create the brand that is Wales, that is particularly North Wales, that people think about, those people who greet you in a cafe or greet you at their B&B or their, the small campsite. It's those things that together make it seem so very special. And I think, do you know what, they have had a really tough time. For our business, the anxiety at the beginning was huge because one just had no idea what was going on. From the point that the furlough scheme came in and the point that the Welsh Government started to support through the Development Bank of Wales, the way became much clearer. I say much clearer. I think we're probably on cash flow forecast number 52 or something, but at least one could start charting a bit of a route. But that said, I think what we have to remember is that it's the sort of it is our teams and our people who are going to bring the business back, and that's the bit that we sort of have to protect somehow, I suppose.
And what with last year, is there anything kind of like big takeaways that you took from that kind of, or realizations about the sector or tourism in general that you learned from?
I think that's really interesting, and that goes back to how we started this conversation, which was about how do we find things from this experience that actually work? And there's a couple of things. One is the fact that we're recording this podcast. I'm in my home, you're in your home. How amazingly sustainable and productive that is as a way of working. I mean, sometimes one misses the very important interaction. But new ways of working can be highly valuable. But the thing that it's really made me realise is around skills and training, because the danger of this moment, I think the big danger, is that we start losing people from the tourism industry. And we're already starting to see it happen. And because people are saying, I need some more security. But what we'll need when we reopen is we really need the valuable knowledge that those people have had. And look, I'm going to say it now. I am really proud of the fact that we have not made a single person redundant through this process because of the furlough. We've been able to do that. And so we've been able to keep those people. But that to me is the thing that I think I've learned about tourism. We still have, to a degree, taken for granted over the years the fact that you can suddenly employ a lot of people at Easter, and we have to rethink that a bit, because that's not actually a very sustainable model of working, is it? Ultimately,
how would you like to see that changing, or how would you like to see things done differently if you could, wave a magic wand? Which we'd all love to do, wouldn't we?
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Look, I think it's going to take quite a long time, and I think it comes back to what I think we'll be discussing as we go through, which is about sustainability generally, and this issue of sort of the social license, I suppose, and the relationship between the tourism industry and communities, and how we value communities and how communities value tourism. One of the key things within that is to make sure that the jobs that we are generating are year round, that they pay enough for people to have a mortgage and raise a family, that that the skill that is required is valued. And I still think there is an issue around the valuing of the skills that it takes to be a good tourism operator. I mean, we all know what it feels like to have good service. And we know in our hearts that actually that's a really difficult thing to do. But somehow we still don't quite value as a society the work that people are doing on the front line. And I think maybe that's something that will come out of this, that we can start to look at. And in terms of your magic wand, I guess it's about resource and support for small to middle-sized businesses to be able to develop that sort of skills and training. That would be what I would want to see. Yeah.
And, I guess there's some basic stuff going on at the minute. Like we at the National Park, we've got the ambassador scheme, which has been hugely more successful than we expected, actually. We've got like 307 today companies signed up on bronze level and more on gold and silver. But there's more than that, isn't there? And there's some work going on with the North Wales Economic Ambition Board with an aspiration for kind of upskilling. Can you see those sort of things, a real aspiration to kind of have better, high quality jobs in the tourism industry? Do you think that will help with the, I guess particularly last season, the sort of factious feelings amongst the community about whether tourism was inverted commas and simplified a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it must do, because there's a sort of logic to that. It's quite interesting because this is something we've talked about often, isn't it? I mean, this is such a sort of, this is at the heart of what we need to achieve as an industry and as an area, because we are very dependent on the wealth that tourism brings and the potential for our communities that revenue and money brings. So what's the phrase that I've been reading a lot lately is this idea of visitor management above visitor attraction. So what we're trying to do, and I think what you're doing with the ambassador scheme and all the work that and I see a lot of thinking going on in people's minds about this, and it's always seemed to me that if you have a good product, that will lead to profitability, which is a very important part of what is sometimes referred to as the triple bottom line: profit, people, planet. It seems really obvious, doesn't it? But that's what we want to achieve. And I suppose it's presented so often, this, as a conflict, isn't it? It's somehow presented as a conflict that managing our visitors better, managing the demand, managing the flow, managing where people go, is somehow going to lead to less employment and less wealth. But that just seems completely counterintuitive to me. It's like people are going to come to North Wales, they're going to have a great experience because we'll have organised the transport in a sustainable way. We'll have told them, maybe through their electronic device, where's busy, where's not busy. Oh, great, I'll go to the place that isn't busy then. Surely that is going to make people have a happy, nice experience. And also is going to mean that people in communities who did have a tough time last summer, they did, and it would be wrong to deny it, that they will also feel better. Sorry, I completely forgot actually the point of your question, which was how does that work in terms of skills? And I think because what we're actually saying is that we need a slightly more complex approach, which includes guiding people to the right places, making sure they get the right information, making sure that the B&B, the guest house, doesn't automatically say, oh, why don't you go up the pig track today? But instead goes, let me get my Ordnance Survey map out. Why don't we have a look at this? Why don't you go over here? That sort of thing. And that's sort of simple, but also requires quite a lot of thinking.
So these kind of things that can massively improve sustainability can improve the experience for the people, the host communities living in the area in terms of visitors coming here. These things can also improve the experience for visitors themselves to a massive degree, which then obviously is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of kind of income from visitors, and increasing the type of visitors that are coming to the area that are going to benefit the local area, that sort of thing.
I think that's absolutely right. And I suspect we're in a sort of transitional period, and like with many things, maybe COVID sort of pushed the transition a bit harder and a bit faster. And a lot of it comes down to, I remember I was at a conference a couple of years ago in Poland, and I was talking to somebody who, the representative of the UN from UNESCO, who looks at sustainable tourism, and he was saying, which is the heart of this. He said, I don't want to be the person who tells people they're not allowed to go to Venice. And we don't want to be the people, do we, who say you're not allowed to walk up Snowdon. But we know there are too many people wanting to walk up Snowdon. We know there are too many people wanting to go to Venice. So what do? Well, we have to be a bit more sophisticated about our product offering and our managing of those visitors, which goes back to the visitor management over visitor attraction issue. And if we manage our visitors in a way that is sensitive and confident, that will make them happy, then surely to goodness that will make our communities happy and will also deliver the revenues that we need. I mean, it sounds simple when you describe it in that way, but there's quite a lot of steps in between, aren't there, I suppose. And I know that's what everybody's slightly grappling with at the moment. I mean, I know that because the park's grappling with these issues right now, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on at the minute to prepare for the coming season, and in a way that kind of tries to give as much as we can a good experience for everybody. Because the mood music we're hearing at the minute is that it's going to be an incredibly busy season again, which is going to be fantastic for the tourism industry. It is so desperately needed, but we just need to make sure that the volume and capacity issue that we had during the incredibly short season last year doesn't manifest itself, and then kind of give North Wales a kind of poor reputation in terms of the experience that it's offering to visitors, I think. So it's trying to kind of make sure that we've got everything we can in place, I guess. And what about you? What sort of preparations are you putting in place for the season, and what are you feeling at the minute in terms of when things are going to open up? I know it's hard to predict, but
well, do you know what it is? And of course, because we were talking about the task force earlier, and I every week there's a group of sort of tourism professionals, and we sit round and we always every week say to the representatives of the government, when do you think we'll open up then? And we go, well, we don't give a date, we describe how we'll get there. And it's like, yeah, we know, but everybody wants a date, don't they? Everybody wants to be able to plan. And I've just literally come out of a team meeting where we have had we've started going out to recruit. I think within 3 days we've had 160 applications for various jobs, which is great for us, but I mean quite interesting in terms of what's going on. And so the difficult bit that we're facing is how we actually manage that process now, because we need to have a start date for people, we need to have a training date, we need to get them ready. So look, in all honesty, I'm planning for our accommodation to be open in April and for the tourist attraction to open sometime between April and May, probably May, but let's keep being optimistic. One of the things one has learned in this crisis is that although things can look astonishingly bleak one week, they can change quite quickly. And spring is coming, the vaccination program is going really well, and so it may be that things will change. But I do have a concern, which I think you just expressed, which is that you're absolutely right. The mood music, the research is sort of going, of course people want to come to North Wales. Of course they do. It's exactly the sort of place you want to come to at a time like this, isn't it? Emotionally. And so we really do have to be very prepared for a large number of people being here, and there's lots of communication around expectation for our communities as well as for our visitors around how that goes. And I think, so Welsh Government are working, and I know you've been involved in this as well, on the sort of recovery plan and communication. And it seems to me that communication is critical at this point. We can't actually change the infrastructure enough to be ready completely. So we do have to have an element of communication around it. I think that's really important, that manages those expectations.
And I guess as a last question, because we're nearly out of time, and do you know what? I could talk to you for hours on those topics.
This is interesting,
passion
isn't it?
Project of mine. So do you think that's, in terms of where our energy and efforts need to go over the next months, and where the difference we can really make is working together, as authorities, as the private sector as well? Is that the thing, communication and reaching out to those audiences that we feel are going to be visiting during the summer?
I think that is to my mind, that is the critical point. Reaching out to those people, communicating about what our expectations are of them, as well as what their expectations are of us. And I think we should not be afraid to have a genuine conversation which says to people, do you know what? This is the sort of place you're coming to. We have our own language. We have our own culture. You're really welcome. And this is what we expect of you. And I wasn't disappointed, but I thought the ADDO campaign last year didn't quite take hold. It didn't quite get the traction one might have liked to say. But those sort of initiatives where we can have conversations with people about what it's going to be like here and what we want from them as well as what they want from us. Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing, because we can't solve all of the big infrastructure issues by May. So probably the conversation is the important bit to do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Like I say, I could chat all morning and all afternoon about these things. I'm sure we'll do another one soon. I wish you all the best in the reopening. And let's keep our fingers crossed that we have a fantastic summer. And I'm sure we'll be bumping into each other virtually sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Well.
Our next podcast will be on the 18th of March. That's through the Welsh language, and we'll be looking at agriculture in Eryri. That podcast is going to be hosted by Rhys Owen, our very own head of conservation and agriculture. And he'll be speaking to farmer and presenter Allwn, as well as Eryri Owen, our principal planning officer from the National Park, and Helen, who's the secretary of the Welsh Mountain Sheep Society. Thank you so much for listening. Please share if you enjoyed the podcast and send us your comments on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram.